Hey folks, happy St. Nick's Day, one of my favorite scary holidays of the year. Why is it scary, you may ask? Well, what if I get cold? 'Tis the season of giving, and one of my favorite things to do during that time is reminisce about Halloween over a month after it happened. My Halloween this year was definitely something to remember. Hey folks, happy Halloween! Spooks and scares are in the air, and it's also National Pasta Month, the only month of the year where I give the Italians a pass. To celebrate, I'm having some friends over for a sort of half pasta, half Halloween party. We're gonna enjoy some fine cuisine and wear dumb costumes. What am I dressing as, you may ask? Well, it was kind of difficult figuring out what I wanted to dress as. I did have one prototype. I couldn't bring myself to wear it in the presence of others. So, as a backup, I'm going to be a French person instead. That country has been haunting me for years. Well, someone's here now. Perfect timing.
Oh my god!
Oh, jeez, I didn't realize you were that afraid of French people.
No, I thought you were a gaming YouTuber.
Well, what are you supposed to be?
A guy who doesn't like grilled cheese. Can't get scared than that.
Guess not.
So, what have you been cooking up?
Just a bowl of linguine so far. See, I wrote boo and sauce, so it's like bit of pasta, bit of Halloween.
So it's some type of, like, creepy pasta?
Yeah. Have you ever looked at noodles and went, well, I'm scarred for life? Creepypastas, the #1 proven way to make 12-year-olds piss themselves. They're basically the internet equivalent of urban legends or ghost stories. I'm not sure anyone ever wanted to fuck the boogeyman, though. There are some pretty iconic ones. Slenderman, Jeff the Killer, this fucking abomination. The origins of creepypastas are hard to trace, and it's hard to ascertain what even defines a creepypasta, but I'd say they rose to prominence around the late 2000s, early 2010s or so, and sort of fell off in the latter half of the decade. People just didn't find them scary anymore. They were interesting and freaky when they were newer, but as they became more ubiquitous and the novelty wore off, people kind of realized that these stories weren't exactly earth-shattering. Even still though, creepypastas maintain some cultural relevance today. Hell, a creepypasta based off of SpongeBob called Squidward's Suicide was actually referenced in the show. And internet horror is far from dead. You could even argue that more recent stuff like The Back Rooms or Local 58 are creepypastas. Personally, I can see it for the former, not so much for the latter. Creepypastas have a very specific vibe to them. It's hard to define, but I know one when I see one. They're usually told at least in part via text, generally revolving around either some supernatural entity, a creepy lost episode of a show, or a haunted video game, and are usually associated with some iconic disturbing image or quote from the story. This sort of style, what I'd call a traditional creepypasta, has definitely died out in recent years. I think nowadays people appreciate them more for their place in internet history and what they brought to the table in their prime rather than judging them on their actual merits. But I have no sense of shame, so keeping with the spirit of Halloween, I'm gonna be resurrecting a corpse. I specifically want to focus on video game creepypastas here, arguably the most abundant and recognizable form of creepypasta out there. I am a gamer after all, sad as it may be, so it only makes sense.
Hi mate, I'm ready to
What?
talk
Oh
this
my
podcast
God,
for
Jesus.
some proper good
What?
news.
Jesus.
Hey, relax. Hey, it's me, Corey.
Oh.
Yeah, I know.
Oh.
Yeah. No, I actually, it's pretty scary, right?
Yeah.
I spent the whole day arguing with British people on the internet to get in character, right? And actually, I found a good pasta recipe. But it is British, so I mean, but what's the worst that could happen, right?
Huh? God damn it!
Video game creepypastas tend to follow similar beats. Someone gets an old game under mysterious circumstances, and bada bing bada boom, it's weird. The game's usually haunted or otherwise fucked up from the get-go, and things get pretty wacky. Unexplained occurrences, strange messages, disturbing sounds and images, they're all par for the course here. Good or bad, any video game fan has to have some serious bravery to read them. I mean, come on, I'm a gamer. I'm already afraid of human interaction. Now you want me to be afraid of Fallout? What are you?
Ah, finally somebody asked. I'm a serial killer.
Oh, so your costume's like a he could be any one of us type of thing.
You know, that's actually one of the more creative ones I've seen.
Costume? Pasta, am I right?
Okay.
All right.
So now what?
Yeah, vibes are kind of off. I'm getting too much pasta, not enough Halloween.
Well, I did order a pumpkin. I thought we could do something with that.
I don't know why it hasn't gotten here yet, though.
Yeah, I think we have to blend the pasta with the Halloween. Otherwise, we're just eating pasta on Halloween.
Right.
Only if there was some way to make this pasta more creepy.
Most creepypastas based off of games, and shows for that matter, tend to focus on things that early 2010s internet users enjoyed in their childhood, stuff from the 1990s and early 2000s. It sort of adds to the horror by subverting traditional sources of comfort and nostalgia and putting a disturbing twist on them. It's reminiscent of the classic horror cliches of haunted dolls or killer clowns. It's taking something that is in theory nice and benevolent and giving it murderous tendencies. Also, I think creepypastas just work better when the subject matter is somewhat old. I think it makes them feel more distant and mysterious. Like, you try telling someone your copy of Star Fox Zero is haunted, you'd be laughed out of the room. They're pretty formulaic, but to be fair, there aren't a whole lot of options for telling a compelling horror story about a video game. I mean, the game's gotta be messed up somehow. I suppose you could get really meta with it, for example, some bleak tale of a guy who wasted his life playing TF2 for 5,000 hours. Huh.
So this pasta, how creepy is it?
How do you even make a children's game scary?
Alright, get this. Sonic murders people. And he has red eyes. There's an absolute treasure trove of video game creepypastas out there. But one of the most famous ones has gotta be sonic.exe, proud trailblazer of the creepypasta tradition of, holy shit, it's got wacky eyes. I'm a total Sonic the Hedgehog fan.
Well, that's the first red flag right there.
Tom, our protagonist, receives a CD in the mail from his friend Kyle. Attached to it is a nice note positively littered with improper commas, warning Tom to destroy this godforsaken disc before he comes after you too, and to absolutely not play the game that's on it. As any normal person would do after reading something like that, Tom decides to play the game anyway because, well, the disc says Sonic on it, you can't pass that up.
You know, if I were him, I would have simply not played it.
Well, like my dad used to say, if Kyle tells you not to play a game, don't play it.
Tom boots up the game and surprise, surprise, it's Sonic. But when he presses start, the title screen gets wacky for a moment. The sky had darkened, the title screen emblem was rusted and ruined, the Sega 1991 was now Sega 666, and the water had turned red like blood, except it looked hyper-realistic. For fuck's sake. Sonic had a creepy smile and, wait for it, red eyes. The game continues to be weird, and Tom continues playing against his better judgment. He plays as Tails, Knuckles, and Eggman, each coming across Sonic before, homicide. All the while, the game displays various creepy messages that seem to be talking directly to Tom. There's also a whole host of disturbing imagery, one of the most notable being followed by one of the story's most famous lines, I am God.
God? I thought he was Sonic.
The story ends when Tom hears a voice say, try to keep this interesting for me, Tom, and turns around to see a Sonic plushie with bloody eyes sitting on his bed. Yeah, the story isn't that good. On the technical side, the writing is pretty mediocre, poor pacing, bland descriptions and word choice, and riddled with grammatical errors. Grammarly would have a field day with this story. But substantively, it just isn't very interesting. It mostly plays out as though the author is just playing some weird hacked game with only the slightest hints of supernatural elements in a few small places. The author tries to include this concept of some horrible demonic entity that tortures its victims, but it's shoehorned in right at the end and reeks of desperation and lack of focus. Not to mention, reading it nowadays, the idea of a messed up haunted version of an innocent kids game just isn't interesting anymore, and the execution isn't good enough to make it interesting. The concept is well known and has been done to death at this point, so the overall story just doesn't age very well. Though, to be completely fair, during its time it was somewhat new and unique, and actually got some scares out of people. It's clowned on now, but it was pretty popular back in its heyday. Hell, someone even made a video game based off of it. But like I said, it didn't age the best and was in fact removed from the Creepypasta wiki a few years after it was published, being deemed low quality and abundant in cliches. In response to the removal, the story's creator, JC the Hyena, posted this lovely screed calling for fans to keep the story alive by spreading it around the web and protesting to have it reinstated. He later apologized for this outburst, and a few years later released a remake of the story that attempts to more clearly make the story about some supernatural entity, which, as I mentioned, was kinda just shoved in at the end in the first incarnation. But hey, it doesn't change the fact that the original story is pretty bad. Now Sonic's all well and good, but hey, what about the anti-Sonic? Yep, Mario's got some creepypastas of his own, the most famous of which is known simply as Mario in all caps. You know shit just got real when the uppercase letters start showing up.
God, you and this Mario guy.
What do you mean? It's
not every time I don't understand.
The NES Godzilla creepypasta is pretty good. It does use similar themes seen in sonic.exe, namely the creepy imagery and the haunted cartridge trope, but it implements them so much better. It was written by an artist named... Cosby Daff? And follows the story of our protagonist, Zack, receiving a copy of Godzilla Monster of Monsters for the NES from a friend. But, as you might expect, this copy is a bit weird. It escalates from minor glitches to notable differences from the normal game to some pretty horrendous and disturbing stuff. All the while, Zack clashes with this nightmare-fueled demon named Red, who seems to have a much closer individual connection with Zack than first thought. It's hard to do it justice by just describing it because it does basically sound like another cliché haunted cartridge story, but it's written well enough to be an actually compelling narrative. The story is paced well, is good at building tension, and with the help of a ton of amazing sprite art, does a great job of immersing you in its world. It also earns points for originality. It's surprisingly emotional for a creepypasta, and the subject matter is really unique in its field. Like, everyone knows Sonic or Mario, but who the hell ever uttered the phrase, "I wish there were a creepypasta about Godzilla Monster of Monsters for NES"? Obviously, it's not some literary masterpiece, but it's quite good, and I genuinely recommend giving it a read at some point.
That must be the pumpkin delivery guy. Someone answer the door, I'll grab my wallet.
Yeah, someone should get on that.
Yeah, someone's gotta get on that.
I think it's your turn, Dave.
No. It's Sunday. It's the last day of the month. It's your turn.
Oh, it's Corey's turn. It's an odd year.
What? I'm examining pasta. It's Dave's day.
Alright.
Hey, no grilled cheese. What's wrong with you?
Oh, it's for a costume, sorry. I completely forgot about Halloween, as it's pasta month and all. Yeah.
Well, I got a pumpkin delivery for definitely not Mick.
Oh, yep. He should be ready to sign.
Sure. What do you want?
Just on the first gift, anywhere.
All right. So, I have to say, I'm a little bit surprised that you guys are celebrating Halloween tonight, considering it's pasta month and all. All my deliveries tonight have just been pasta.
Well, that's the thing. We take pasta, we're eating it on Halloween. A little bit of pasta, a little bit of spooky, mix it both,
Okay, cool. So, I guess you could say it's a little bit of a creepy pasta party?
Yeah.
We were actually just telling some video game ghost stories if you want to join us.
Oh. Well, I mean, this was my last delivery of the night. Why not? Sitting in a group setting like this really reminds me of one of my last jobs. It was promising at first, but then I lost my license and had to deal with some really problematic Tier 2 players. But I'm really thankful that that's all behind me now. Son of a bitch!
Pokemon has no shortage of creepypastas. In fact, I'd argue Pokemon creepypastas are probably the most ubiquitous of any franchise. A lot of them are based off of Lavender Town from Red and Blue in one way or another, and I mean, it makes sense. Lavender Town is creepy as fuck.
You're afraid of color?
It's a town based around a massive graveyard for dead Pokemon. There's an NPC that tells you there's a white hand on your shoulder, and one of the trainers you battle in the tower wants your blood. But the creepiest element of it by far is that goddamn music.
You're afraid of a song?
Pitches are coming!
Its haunting, high-pitched drone instantly instills a sense of dread in the listener, and it's become one of the most iconic tracks of the entire franchise for a lot of longtime fans. It's only natural then that we'd eventually get an internet ghost story based off of it in the form of Lavender Town Syndrome. This urban legend tells of a wave of young children dying by suicide following the release of Pokemon Red and Green in Japan. Versions of the story vary, but generally the culprit that gets pointed at is Lavender Town's infamous song. And I mean, it's not very pleasant to listen to. More specifically though, it was a particular version of the song that played in the original Japanese Red and Green, which supposedly contains some sound frequencies only perceptible by children, frequencies that I guess just destroyed their brain somehow. There is a supposed beta version of the song that is genuinely pretty revolting to listen to, but it's also not real. Another Lavender Town-based creepypasta, one that really fucked me up back in the day, is the story of Buried Alive. See, in Pokemon Red and Blue, you have to explore the Lavender Tower, basically just the in-game Pokemon graveyard. When you reach the top, you have to use the Sylph Scope to fight the vengeful ghost of a dead Marowak. However, as the Buried Alive story goes, it was originally planned for the player to fight a different boss, that of course being the titular character. You'd encounter Buried Alive at the top of the tower, and it'd say stuff like, "I'm very lonely, won't you join me?" And I mean, yeah, it must be pretty lonely not existing. Buried alive appeared to be a skeletal corpse clawing its way out of the ground, and would have a muck, a Gengar, and 2 white hands. White Hand itself coming from another mini creepypasta about a dangerous gift supposedly hidden in the code of a game for a console that couldn't read GIFs. These Pokemon were all at comically high levels, especially given that Lavender Town comes about midway through the game, but mysteriously, if you did manage to beat Buried Alive, the game would simply freeze. If you lost, though, our undead friend would say, "Finally, fresh meat," before the game cut to a game over screen featuring an image of Buried Alive eating the player character. Weirder still is that the game would then download the image to your Game Boy and would display it whenever you started up the system. So not only are you traumatized, but now you have to buy a new Game Boy. This story gets credit from me mainly for all of its supplemental media. The hacked gameplay and sprite art are really quite creepy and add just a tiny bit of believability to the story. I don't know, there's something about the 8-bit simplicity of it that makes it seem more realistic, even though the subject matter is pretty ludicrous. Obviously not enough to make anyone believe that Game Freak wanted to put a living corpse that eats you into their fun fantasy game about befriending magical monsters, but it definitely scared the shit out of me when I was 12. Neither of these 2 Lavender Town stories are real, obviously, but for a while they did take on the status of being more so rumors or urban legends, and from what I can recall, some people actually believe them as fact. It really just goes to show you how much Lavender Town and its freaky-ass music and aesthetics affected people. It was just such an unexpectedly eerie place for a generally light-hearted children's game, and so the stuff that was actually in it just caused people's imaginations to kinda run wild. Few creepypastas have obtained broad cultural resonance quite like the story of Herobrine. It's a pretty well-known tale at this point, but for the uninitiated, it's about a mysterious entity haunting Minecraft's single-player mode. Players would find mysterious physical disturbances in the world that appeared to be man-made, like mysterious 2x2 tunnels, ocean pyramids, and trees with all the leaves cut off. If a player came into contact with Herobrine, he would appear to be an exact copy of the default player skin Steve, with the only difference being his iconic blank white eyes. Some players eventually discovered that Herobrine was the name of the brother of Minecraft's creator, Hatsune Miku. Upon emailing Miku asking about this brother, she responded saying she did have a brother, but that he is no longer with us. Of course, the existence of Herobrine was later publicly debunked by Miku, but the legend prevailed. Herobrine has become an iconic character in the Minecraft community, with so much media and a fair amount of mods made about him. He's even been acknowledged by Mojang themselves. He's appeared in several pieces of promotional media, and in every major update since Beta 1.6.6, the changelog includes removed Herobrine as a running gag. He's become such a large presence that even though he's not canon, he might as well be. I think part of this can be credited to the clever design of the original story. It was pretty short and just vague and subdued enough to make it semi-believable. If you ignore the dead brother part. Like, was it really that absurd for this quirky indie game to have a mysterious character that only rarely and briefly shows up to mess with you? Hell, in the past, my friends and I even started worlds dedicated to hunting for him. The story of Herobrine has existed almost as long as Minecraft itself, and the way in which the story was written and subsequently spread like wildfire has allowed the character to take on a life of its own. Hey, you know Ben? Yeah, he had a bit of an incident involving water and not breathing. Ben Drowned is one of the most, if not the most, iconic video game creepypastas of all time. It features a lot of the typical fixtures of video game creepypastas, being a story about a haunted cartridge that does wacky things, but in many ways it pioneered the genre, giving life to these types of stories at a time when they were pretty new. It was originally published in a series of posts on 4chan's X-Board, the place dedicated to all spooky and paranormal happenings. It follows the story of its author, Jaduzable, receiving an old cartridge of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask from some weird old guy, and we all know how this ends. The game displays tons of minor inconsistencies and glitches before devolving into a hopelessly corrupt mess with all sorts of creepy and bizarre shit happening. As it turns out, the cartridge is haunted by the ghost of its previous owner, a 12-year-old boy named Ben who, you guessed it, drowned. He harasses and communicates with Jaduzable in a variety of ways, primarily through the game itself and the AI chat generator Cleverbot. Later on, it's revealed that Ben has been hijacking Jaduzable's computer to tell a false version of the actual story, and using that to somehow escape onto the internet and into the wider world, saying, "Now I am everywhere." The most notable thing about this creepypasta, though, is how Jaduzable makes clever use of glitches and hacking to make compelling and unsettling gameplay footage to enhance the story.
Oh, there it is. Screwtail's mascot.
It's a fucking ginger!
They are pretty freaky to watch, and more importantly, it was a narrative technique that had never really been utilized in this context before. The effective use of multimedia storytelling to weave together a creepy tale revolving around what is already a pretty spooky game by Zelda standards helped the story gain widespread popularity. At the time, it was something fresh and unique that had never been done before, and it cemented its status as an icon of internet horror even today. Something that I didn't know is that it actually evolved into a bigger, convoluted ARG type thing that only wrapped up last year after starting in 2010, but I think the original first arc of the story is what people remember the most and what gave it so much cultural sticking power. It's a unique, clever, and well put together spooky story that ranks among the all-time greats. At the end of the day, video game creepypastas are kinda goofy. The premise on its own is very limited and results in an endless recycling of extremely similar tropes, no matter how well or poorly the stories themselves are written. But despite all that, I kinda love them. There's something weirdly nostalgic about these stories. I think they just bring me back to an earlier time when this scared the shit out of me. A lot of people, myself included, really enjoyed them and got some good scares out of them back in their prime, and it's nice to look back and appreciate what they were and the impact they had on online users and culture. Good or bad, they have their place in internet history. Stuff like Ben Drowned and NES Godzilla are genuinely very creative and high-quality works, and even sonic.exe, which I ragged on heavily for being a garbage story, I can't help but smile at. Stuff like Lavender Town Syndrome, Buried Alive, or Herobrine may not be as widely believed nowadays, but they're still remembered. These stories have faded from prominence over time, and they may not be as fresh or frightening or taken as seriously as they once were, but I will always appreciate what they provided to me and a lot of other people all those years ago.
Well, this is fun, but I'm all out of pasta.
Yep.
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 Well, we might as well do something with the pumpkin.
Yeah, why not?
This pumpkin isn't even real! What the hell kind of delivery alright.
I've been trying to get a refund for this for the past month, and I have heard nothing from the company. Season of giving my ass.